spent 31 years working as a family court mediator in Fulton County, Georgia. I sat across from hundreds of couples in the worst moments of their lives. I watched men lie with perfect stillness. I watched women shrink themselves into corners I couldn't reach. I learned to read a room the way some people read weather. Not from what was said, but from what wasn't. I never thought I would need that skill for my own daughter. Her name is Wren. She was born on a Tuesday in October during a thunderstorm that knocked out the power at Piedmont Hospital, and the nurses delivered her by flashlight. I always said that was the most Wren thing that ever happened. She arrived in the dark and lit up the room anyway. She was headstrong. She was funny in that quiet way where she'd say one sentence and leave you laughing for 10 minutes after she left. She painted watercolors on Sunday mornings. She could argue a case at the dinner table that would make a lawyer sweat. I raised her alone after her father passed. She was 9. And I poured everything I had into making sure she knew her own worth. I thought I did a good job. I thought wrong. His name was Griffin. He came into her life at 34 when she was working as a project coordinator for a non-profit in Atlanta. He was in commercial real estate. He wore his suits like he was born in them. The first time he shook my hand, he looked me in the eye and said, "I've heard so much about you. Wren talks about you constantly. She lights up when she says your name." I smiled. I meant it. He was the kind of man who made you feel seen in a conversation. He remembered small things, the name of my late husband, the fact that I took my coffee with oat milk, the title of a book I mentioned once in passing that he showed up with the next time. He asked questions like he actually wanted the answers. He laughed at the right moments. He was warm without being performative, attentive without being smothering. He was very, very good. They dated for 14 months before he proposed. She called me from the parking lot of the restaurant, still crying, and I could hear the joy in her voice like something that had been waiting a long time to get out. I sat on my back porch in the dark with my phone pressed to my ear, and I cried too. I don't cry easily. Ask anyone who knows me. The wedding was small, 60 people, outdoor ceremony at a farm in Dahlonega in June. Wren wore her grandmother's pearl earrings, and Griffin cried when he saw her walk down the aisle. I remember thinking, this is what it looks like. This is the thing I wanted for her. I noticed the first thing about 3 weeks after the wedding. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a red flag waving in my face. It was a sentence. We were on the phone, and I asked if she wanted to come over for dinner that Sunday. I was making her favorite, chicken and dumplings, and she paused for just a moment too long before she said, "Let me check with Griffin first." Wren had never in her life waited to check with anyone about dinner at her mother's house. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was marriage. 2 schedules now. Normal adjustments. The next time it was her hair. She'd worn her hair natural, her whole adult life, big and loose and beautiful. She showed up to my house one afternoon with it straightened, pulled back tight. I told her she looked lovely. She did. She always does. But I asked if she'd done something different, and she said, "Griffin likes it this way. He says it looks more professional." She said it the way you'd say the weather report. Flat, matter of fact, like it wasn't her hair. I let it go. Over the following months, I started keeping a list in my head, not because I was looking for trouble, because 31 years in family court had rewired something in my brain that I couldn't switch off. I noticed the way she stopped mentioning her co-workers by name. She used to tell me stories about them constantly. I noticed that she started arriving to family events with just enough time to stay politely and leaving before dessert. I noticed that she laughed differently, less from the belly, more careful. Like she was measuring how much space her laughter was allowed to take up. Her best friend, a woman she'd known since the 7th grade, called me in January. She was trying to keep her voice casual and failing. She said Wren had cancelled their last 4 plans. She said, the last time they talked on the phone, Wren had gotten very quiet in the middle of a sentence and said she had to go. She said she was worried and she didn't know who else to call. I got off the phone and sat with that for a long time. I started making more reasons to see Wren alone. Not obviously. I'd call and say I needed help with something at the house, a jar I couldn't open, a form I didn't understand, things small enough to be believable. She would come, and for the first hour she'd be stiff, like she was listening for something outside the window. Then slowly, over coffee or walking in the backyard, she'd start to come back to herself. She'd laugh the real laugh. She'd finish a thought without editing it. And then her phone would buzz and something would go out behind her eyes. I asked her once, carefully, how things were going with Griffin. She said, fine. She said he worked hard and he was stressed sometimes. She said real estate had been difficult lately. She said he didn't mean anything by it when he got quiet. I nodded. I didn't push. I knew better than to push. The way women leave situations like this, if they leave, is not by being told to. It's not by having someone name it for them before they're ready. You push too hard and they pull back because the person they're protecting you from is also the person they're sleeping next to, and they have to live in that house tonight. So I waited. I showed up. I kept the door open. It was his mother who made it impossible to stay quiet. Her name was Nadette. She lived 40 minutes north of Atlanta in a big house in Alpharetta that she'd received in her own divorce settlement 20 years earlier. She called it the family home, with a possessiveness that told you everything about how she saw family. She was slim and well-dressed, and she had a way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes. She had an opinion about everything, and she delivered those opinions like she was doing you a favor. She did not like me. She was too well-mannered to say so directly. Instead, she would remark on things. She remarked on the fact that Wren still called me every day. She remarked on the fact that Wren had kept her last name at work. She remarked once, in a voice just sweet enough to make it difficult to object to, that she'd always felt women who worked in social services had a tendency to see problems where there weren't any. She was talking about me. We were in the same room. She was talking about me. We were in the same room. She was talking about me. I smiled and asked her to pass the sweet tea. The dinner happened in March. Griffin and Wren were hosting their house in East Point, a 1940s bungalow they'd renovated themselves. Nadette had driven down. 2 of Griffin's cousins were there. A man named, I'll just call him the younger cousin, and his wife. And me. Wren had been cooking since that morning. I know because she texted me at 9 a.m. asking if I thought she should make a separate vegetarian option in case anyone didn't eat meat. That was Wren, the kind of person who anticipates other people's needs before they even have them. I arrived at 6. The table was beautiful. She had put out real cloth napkins, the ones we'd found together at an estate sale 2 years ago, pale yellow with tiny embroidered flowers at the corners. There were candles. There was a playlist going softly in the background. She'd made a pot roast with carrots and fingerling potatoes, fresh biscuits, a green bean casserole, and a peach cobbler for dessert. She was glowing when I walked in. That was the word for it. Glowing. When I walked in. That was the word for it. Glowing. She had her hair down, and she was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, blue and loose, and she hugged me at the door and whispered, "I'm so glad you're here." I didn't know yet that this dinner would be the last time I'd be a guest in that house. We sat down. Grace was said. Plates were passed. And then Nadette cut into her pot roast and said, without looking up, "Griffin, honey, I thought you told her how to do a proper braise." The table went quiet. Not completely quiet. Quiet in that way where everyone keeps moving, fork to plate, glass to lip, but something underneath goes still. Wren was smiling. The smile was the kind that takes everything you have to hold in place. She said quietly, I followed the recipe we always use. Nadette said, in a way that was worse than any sentence. Griffin said nothing. I watched him. He was cutting his meat. He did not look at his wife. He did not look at his mother. He was looking at his plate with the focused attention of a man who had decided some time ago that looking away was the easiest thing. The conversation started back up. I helped it along. I asked Griffin's cousin about their new place in Smyrna. I asked about the renovation. The table relaxed. And then, 20 minutes later, Wren got up to refill the water pitcher. She was gone for maybe 2 minutes. When she came back to her seat, she set the pitcher down and reached for her napkin, and Griffin said, in a voice that was low and controlled and completely calm, "You forgot to bring out the extra biscuits." Wren said, "I'm sorry, I'll get them. I mentioned it before dinner." "I know. I mentioned it specifically." The younger cousin's wife was looking at her plate. I was looking at Griffin. Nadette was looking at Wren with an expression that I had seen before, in my years in family court, on the faces of women who had taught their sons that this was how love worked. Wren said, "I'll get them now." She stood up, and Griffin's hand came across the table and he grabbed her wrist. Hard. She flinched. Not a small flinch, a full-body flinch, the kind that lives in muscle memory, the kind that doesn't happen the first time. And Nadette said, with a small satisfied nod, "She has to learn, Griffin." I want to be very clear about what I felt in that moment. It was not panic. It was not rage. I know what rage feels like, and this was not it. What I felt was something colder and more specific than rage. It was the thing that used to settle over me in a courtroom when all the noise dropped away and I understood exactly what I was looking at and exactly what I needed to do next. I set down my fork. I folded my napkin. I put it beside my plate. I looked at my daughter and I said in a voice that was very calm and very clear, "Wren, come help me in the kitchen." Nadette said, "She doesn't need. I wasn't speaking to you." I stood up. Wren stood up. We walked to the kitchen. I closed the door. She was already crying, silently, the way people cry when they've had a lot of practice crying without making noise. I held her face in my hands for a moment. I said, "Listen to me. I need you to listen." She nodded. I said, "You are going to go upstairs and you're going to get your purse, your phone charger, and your insurance cards from the Home Office. I know where they are, the bottom left drawer in the green folder. Do you understand?" She said, "Mom, do you understand?" She nodded. She went upstairs. I went back to the dining room. I sat down. I picked up my fork. Griffin was looking at me with the particular expression of a man who has never been quietly looked at by someone who wasn't afraid of him. Nadette was looking at me with something sharper. I said, "I want to be honest with both of you. I spent over 3 decades working in the family court system in this county. I have sat with a lot of families. I know what a pattern looks like, and I know what it leads to." I kept my voice completely level. What just happened at this table is called domestic violence. In Georgia, physical restraint with intent to intimidate is a misdemeanor at minimum, and, given documented history, can be charged as a felony. I want you both to know that I understand the law and I will use it. Griffin opened his mouth. I said, "I'm not finished." Nadette said, "This is a family matter and you are overstepping." I said, "I'm her mother. There is no overstepping." I heard Wren's footsteps on the stairs. I heard the front door. I heard her car in the driveway. I stood up. I pushed my chair in carefully. I said, "Thank you for dinner. The pot roast was excellent." I left. I'd spent 3 decades doing this work, and I still had the name and direct number of the best family law attorney in the county in my phone. I called her that night. Not the next morning, that night at 9:45, And she answered because we had worked together long enough that she knew if I was calling that late, it wasn't small. I also called the non-emergency police line and filed a report for what I had witnessed, including the names of every person at that table. What followed was not fast. I want to say that honestly, because I think people hear a story like this and they expect it to resolve in a clean line. It didn't. Ren stayed with me for 2 weeks, then went back. I sat with that. I did not chase her. I did not argue. I kept the porch light on. She left again in May. This time she didn't go back. The divorce was filed in June. Griffin contested it. His attorney was expensive and aggressive and sent 3 letters in the first month alone. But the attorney I had called, the one who answered at 9:45, was better. She had the police report. She had statements from the younger cousin's wife, who had seen enough that night to be willing to put her name on paper. She had documentation that Ren's former co-workers had noticed changes in her behaviour over the course of the marriage that they were willing to describe. The court process took 8 months. At the end of it, Griffin was ordered out of the house. Ren kept it. She kept the car. She received a settlement that gave her time to find her footing without scrambling. Nadette sent me a letter in September. I won't quote from it. I will say that I read it once, understood it for what it was, and recycled it. I want to tell you what Ren looks like now. She started going to a therapist in July, a woman who specializes in domestic recovery and who comes recommended by a support organization I've been connected to for years. She goes every Tuesday. She calls it Tuesday maintenance. She says it like it's an oil change, practical and necessary, and I love her for that. She went back to wearing her hair the way she likes it. She called her best friend. That took courage. To pick up the phone after months of silence and say I'm sorry and I'm ready. Her friend answered on the second ring. She painted again, first time in almost 3 years. She set up a little table by the window in the spare bedroom, and she painted a watercolour of the peach tree in my backyard. It hangs in my living room now. I look at it every morning. She laughs from the belly again. I'm not going to pretend I don't carry some weight from this. I spent 31 years being trained to see exactly this thing, and I still missed 2 years of it happening to my own child. I've had to sit with that. I've had to ask myself the questions I asked other families. What did I miss? Where did I look away? Why did I tell myself it was adjustment when I knew, somewhere under everything, that it wasn't? I think the answer is that love makes you want to be wrong. You want so badly for the person your child loves to be, who they appeared to be, that you give the benefit of the doubt longer than you should. You tell yourself you're respecting her autonomy. You tell yourself you're not overreacting. You tell yourself you're not her own mind. All of that is true, and it is not the whole story. What I know now, what I would say to any mother or father or sister or brother sitting with that low-grade worry and trying to talk themselves out of it: don't talk yourself out of it. You don't have to be certain. You don't have to catch them in the act. You just have to keep showing up. Keep the door open. Learn the name of a good attorney before you need one. Know what resources exist in your county, and when the moment comes, and sometimes it comes at a dinner table, in front of other people, in a way that leaves no room for doubt, be ready to be calm. Calm is the most powerful thing in the room, not louder, not angrier. Calm. My daughter is safe. She is funny again, the way she used to be funny. The sentence that takes 10 minutes to stop laughing at. She called me last Sunday and we talked for an hour and 20 minutes about nothing in particular. At the end she said, "I love you, Mum." And I said, "I know, baby," which is what I always say. It means, I know because I never stopped knowing. Even when you couldn't feel it, even when you thought you'd gone somewhere I couldn't reach, I was always there. Now, I want to hear from you. If any part of this story felt familiar, if something your gut has been trying to tell you and you've been trying to quiet it down, please say something to someone. It doesn't have to be the police. It doesn't have to be a lawyer. It can be one person you trust, one conversation, one moment of saying this out loud. Your life is worth that conversation. What city are you watching from? And what did this story bring up for you? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I've been thinking about what people mean when they talk about consequences, not in any grand or cosmic sense, just the plain mechanical truth of it. What you do accumulates. What you allow accumulates. What you allow accumulates. And at some point, the pile gets so high it ticks over, and nobody should be surprised by what falls. Griffin didn't wake up one morning and decide to become the man who grabbed his wife's wrist in front of her mother. He became that man slowly, through 100 small moments where someone looked the other way, where Nadette laughed instead of correcting, where the people around him confused compliance with love and control with care. Every time that behavior was met with silence, it got a little more comfortable, a little more certain of itself. That's not fate, that's not luck, that's just what happens when nothing pushes back. And Wren, my daughter who I raised to know better, who I thought I had equipped, she didn't lose herself all at once either. It happened the way fog comes in. You don't see it moving, you just look up one day and you can't see the road anymore. She stopped mentioning her friends. She started editing her laugh. She asked permission to have dinner at her own mother's house. Each one of those things alone sounds like nothing. Together they were a map of where she had gone. What I've had to make my peace with is this: intelligence is not a shield. I spent 3 decades in family court. I knew the language of this. I knew the progression, the pattern, the way it hides inside the early warmth. And I still told myself, for longer than I should have, that I was probably wrong, because I wanted to be wrong. That wanting, that hope, is not a weakness. But it can become one if you let it override what you actually see. The thing that finally mattered was not being right. It was being ready. Ready with the attorney's name. Ready with the knowledge of what constituted documented abuse under Georgia law. Ready to be calm at a dinner table when everything in me wanted to be something else entirely. That readiness didn't come from anger. It came from years of paying attention, of taking the work seriously, of building the kind of knowledge that doesn't leave you when you need it most. That's the thing I want to say to anyone sitting with a worry they can't quite name. Not that you need a law degree, not that you need to have it all figured out, just that paying attention is a skill, and using what you know is a choice, and calm, real, deliberate, I have thought about this calm, is something you can prepare for before the moment arrives. Wren painted again last month. She brought the watercolour over on a Sunday, and we hung it together. She made coffee. We sat on the back porch for 2 hours and talked about nothing serious at all. I watched her laugh and I thought, there it is. That's the thing that was always there, waiting for the room to be safe enough to come back out. Some things, once you stop feeding them, don't survive, and some things, once you stop starving them, do.